Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Atsui Inu, and today I will be attempting to demystify Ascendancies for new PoE players. This is made for people who have not yet played Path of Exile 1 or are maybe not very experienced with the game. I'm going to try to explain things in a way that even a child could understand, and only will be using public information from the game studio that created the game, and will not be including any spoilers or leaks. So what is this video about? Well, basically, a post came out from the studio recently giving full Ascendancy information, basically telling us what all would be included in each of them. PoE veterans were hyped off their asses and almost shit themselves, and new players were extremely confused. And I think that's ultimately because the game studio was kind of backed into a situation where they would release this information due to the leaks from the beta they have going on. I bet they were probably not prepared to provide this information in a way that new players would be familiar with. So with that, this is not going to be a full overview. It hopefully just helps you understand some more Path of Exile language that can be kind of complex, and maybe helps you decide which one you want to play based off of the information here. I don't know what I'm going to be picking yet. I'm an indecisive piece of shit, so don't ask me. Okay, Sorceress has two Ascendancy options. One is the Stormweaver and the other is the Chronomancer. And if you want to read further, you can pause the video, or I will link the forum post in the description. Yeah, generally though, these Ascendancies are going to start from this little diamond thing. You've got 8 different points you can allocate, and you kind of have to path to the special nodes through these smaller nodes. So that means you'll have to take this one to take node 1, and then the charts are the corresponding descriptions. So I'll let you pause if you need to read this. Okay. Sorceress, Stormweaver, and Chronomancer. So I think there's a couple of deceiving little things here. Number one is that scaling crit chance is really tough in PoE. So you can see I just pulled Fireball from Path of Exile 1, which has a critical strike chance at base of 6%. When you see increased critical chance by 20%, that does not mean you have a 26% crit chance. It is 1.2 times 6%, okay? So that means scaling up your crit chance to a very high degree is pretty tough to do. Another note is that the Stormweaver Elemental Storm probably has a cooldown. So you're not going to be like blasting these storms all over the place. It's going to be something that happens every few seconds probably, and is probably going to be scaled in frequency by cooldown reduction, okay? They mention chill and chill magnitude. Chill, the description is very simple and exactly what it sounds like. It slows. So it slows you, it slows enemies, it reduces action speed, okay? Chill magnitude means that it might slow more. Enemies move even slower, they attack even slower, and all of that stuff. Shock's description in PoE 1 is that you take up to 50% increased damage. Shock is incredibly convoluted, so all I want you to know for now is that it makes enemies take more damage. Hits deal damage on impact, so this is important to note because it does not include things like damage over time. Not everything is a hit. Recoup. Recoup means that you're going to recover some of the damage taken from hits as energy shield, life, or mana over 4 seconds. Note that this takes place over time and is not instant, okay? Consume a cooldown. So this one is kind of complicated because we have no idea if how this exactly was going to work. It's not fully confirmed, and I haven't played the game myself to test it. It's hard to know if this basically only applies to skills that have like 2 charges, for example, or if this is going to prevent skills from going on cooldown. But it is important to note that these skills must have a cooldown to benefit from this. More cast speed is significant because the word more is something that maybe Path of Exile players don't understand in the same way. So an increase is different from more. So increases go into the multiplier, whereas more applies outside of that. And so you can see here that like inside the multiplier, I mean that it's like you know, inside of one of these stats. So it's additive bonus, whereas more is multiplicative because it goes outside of that. Important to note that more is generally going to be better and harder to find. Warrior has Titan, 3, 2, 1, and then Warbringer, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Some of the words referenced here include slam. Slam is just a type of attack. So that means it's not going to apply to every single attack you do. This relates to my last video and what we're talking about with gem tags. And this is only going to apply to slams. So here we see every second slam skill. Note that it says use yourself as well, which very specifically means that like something else cannot be causing this effect to happen. It has to be you actively slamming, okay? Aftershock. Aftershock is basically an extra area of effect damage that happens later. So it doesn't happen immediately typically. It's hard to say what this is gonna look like ahead of time, but hopefully that brief description is helpful. Absorb is a new term and it sounds preventative, but we're not sure. So we'll have to see. The difference between, you know, preventative versus like, you know, something that you take the hit of and then it just doesn't do damage, or it, you know, gives you health or something. You know, I think the difference is that you don't take the hit. So we don't know what that means yet, or which one that's classified by. And so more to come on that later, but I think it's just important to note because like if something hits you, even though it doesn't do damage, it can still apply effects to you. So like a poison or something, in ignite or a chill, we talked about ignite and chill, or sorry, we talked about chill and shock earlier, and those would both be fair game potentially. Inventory slots. The inventory slots are basically just the amount of space you have for things you pick up off the floor, and we don't know how useful this will be because it really just depends on you as a player and how much stuff you pick up. Increased effect of small passive skills. So this one I think sounds maybe underwhelming to a new player, but it means that you can get more out of your passive tree and is actually something that could be pretty dang good. So, you know, this is one to keep an eye on potentially. Totem, I included an image of that on the right. It's basically a summoned entity that casts a spell. That's basically what it does. It doesn't move or anything like that. Stun is something that interrupts and prevents an enemy from acting. You can also be stunned by enemies, which would interrupt you and prevent you from doing anything. Armor break. We don't know how this works yet, but it maybe boosts physical damage. Armor mitigation scales dependent on the size of your hit in PoE 1. This means that, like, for reference, a Pinnacle boss, one of the bosses in Path of Exile 1, has 62,000 armor, which, if you're doing a 1,000 damage hit, would mitigate 50% of. If you're doing a 10,000 damage hit, it'll mitigate 9% of. You know, damage and armor and all that is a little bit complex in terms of scaling, and I am very confident that this is going to change. The scaling itself is going to change in PoE 2. Maybe even the way it works in general is going to be completely different, so we'll just have to wait and see. Raised Shield. Raised Shield is a new mechanic in Path of Exile 2 where you actually have to like lift up your shield in order to use it. We'll see more about how that works when we play. Rangers got Deadeye. 1, 2, 3. And Pathfinder. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Some of the terms that you might have seen here are frenzy charges. We don't know exactly how this is going to work in Path of Exile 2, especially when it comes to consumption of frenzy charges, because that's something that we heard about in terms of power charges and is not something that we're very familiar with. But in Path of Exile 1, a frenzy charge gives players more damage, increased attack speed, and cast speed for each frenzy charge you have. And I guess we'll find out what it does in Path of Exile 2 soon. Accuracy penalty. Accuracy, basically, like it sounds, affects your chance to hit. The further you away you are, the less accurate they are. We don't know that much more yet. Additional projectile. Additional projectiles are massively beneficial in Path of Exile 1 and is something that you'll want to keep your eye on for PoE 2. Mark. Mark is a type of curse which affects enemies and mostly just causes like some kind of effect on hit or on kill. I'll talk more about curses later. I put an image of young Mark Roberts on the right from the Path of Exile team, just because we're talking about Marks. Tailwind is something that I think will largely depend on, like how good it is will largely depend on the game's pacing overall, how often like enemies will hit you, as well as your ability yourself of not getting hit as much. So that's something just to keep an eye on, and know that it's pretty hard to dodge every single hit that comes your way, especially when you're dealing with a large number of enemies as you do in Path of Exile. Spread is something that is going to be dependent on how many enemies are clustered together. So if there's a ton of enemies that are all super close together, there's that kind of thing is going to mean that spread is going to be absolutely busted and strong. But if there's like two enemies standing next to each other, it's not going to be that useful. So just for reference, like proliferation effects are incredibly strong in PoE 1, and we don't know what that's going to look like in PoE 2 yet. It just depends on how many enemies you're fighting at the same time and how hard it is to kill them. Number of poisons, the baseline in Path of Exile 2 is just one poison, so doubling the number of poisons and scaling that up as a factor is going to be massive in PoE 2, most likely. Passive skill points. This might sound to you as a new player as maybe not something super impactful, but it can be extremely impactful, really especially towards endgame. So, generally speaking, stuff further out in your tree is going to be more impactful, and maybe that 5 points is going to be a huge difference in grabbing what you need. Movement speed penalty. This is something also new to PoE 2. You move slower when you have your bow drawn. Which has Blood Mage, 3, 2, 1, and Infernalist, 3, 2, 1. Okay, some of the terms are Leech, which basically recovers life, energy, shield, or mana, just depending on what the text says in the thing that's got Leech. And it recovers that based on the damage that's done to an enemy. In PoE 1, it had a cap on how much it could recover per second and in total. So if you hit an enemy and walk away, there's restrictions on how much you can get every second, and there's a restriction on how much in total you can get. This total is based on your max of that resource. So specifically Life Leech was maxed at 10% with a maximum of 2% per second, and there were ways to increase this, okay? Curse. A curse is just a kind of debuff in general. The base number in PoE 1 that you could have of curses on a single enemy was 1, but could be increased. This is where things get a little muddy. Curse versus a mark. A mark is a type of curse, but a curse is not necessarily a mark. There were a lot of things that existed in Path of Exile 1 that were kind of like this, but just know it's kind of like how a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square, right? Okay. Bleeding magnitude. So the bleeding is a type of damage over time. Damage from bleed in Path of Exile 1 was based on base damage of the attack that caused it. So a damage, attack that did 10 base damage versus 100 would do different amounts of bleed. Bleed does more damage if the target is moving or not moving. Wait, I said that poorly. Bleed does more damage if a target is moving. Simple, easy. Okay, Grasping Wounds. Grasping Wounds sounds like a must-take. This one helps increase your effective maximum hit taken and is mitigated through Leech, Regen, or other means. It sounds kind of not that crazy potentially to a new player, but Path of Exile 1 players will know that there is a extremely rare item called Progenesis that is highly sought after in the game, and this is exactly the same effect that it has. Really, it's hard to explain why this is so good, but essentially, your maximum hit taken means that less things will one-shot kill you. And it also means that while you're taking that damage, that 25% of the damage over time, you can recover that. And so it means that like there's a lot of things that you would know, like, typically not be able to survive that you would be able to with this. Shapeshift means that you're going to lose access to your other skills. I don't know how this is going to work with other like edge cases, like minions that are summoned or skills granted by equipment. We'll have to see. But for all intents and purposes, I would assume you just get a new form, new skills that you can use, and that's it. Low and high. So low and high is very vague. I think it might mean below or above 50%. Accordingly, this number was dropped in an interview a while back, maybe like a week ago, and it was different from Path of Exile 1, so it might be different here as well. I have no idea what the exact number is going to be. I think they said 50%, and this might even be different for each mechanic. But if you want to correct me on that, you can find that information in Zizarin's interview of Jonathan Rogers from Path of Exile. Okay, Mercenary has Witchhunter, 3, 2, 1, and Gemling Legionnaire, 3, 2, 1. Okay, weapon set skill points. So I add an image on the top right there. Basically, you have 2 different sets of weapons that you can equip at the same time, but only one of them is going to be active at a time. They talked very briefly about this, but just know that you can swap weapons on the fly, and this weapon swap includes both your main and offhands. What weapon set skill points means is that you could have different setups of your passive tree for each of your weapon sets. Culling means that you're going to instantly kill low enemies, and this is great for fast clear, but is less effective against the stronger enemies, whereas Decimating Strike will do a big chunk of damage on the first hit and might be good with on bosses, especially bosses with recovery phases, meaning like, you bring the boss down to 25% and then it's, turns into a demon and is back at full health, and you're going to be able to chunk it on that first hit again. Could be more useful in those kinds of situations. Explode is way more impactful than you might think. At least it was in Path of Exile 1. When you're fighting a giant pack of enemies that like has a rare enemy that's really tough in it, all of the little guys explode first and deal a huge amount of damage to the strong rare. And these explosions can potentially chain to do massive clear. So like one enemy's explosion can explode and like kill another enemy, and that enemy could potentially explode. 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but it definitely is. Gemling Legionnaire. Gemling Legionnaire overall is either going to be buffing your skill gems or helping you attribute stack, which is an archetype of build in Path of Exile 1. I think Gemling Legionnaire is maybe going to be a single attribute stacker, so you'd pick between strength, dex, and int to max out on, but I think it's hard to say. I don't think stacking dexterity was a thing in Path of Exile 1. I don't think anybody really exclusively does that. And so maybe that's important for you to know if you're picking this to be an attribute stacker. Copies of a support gem. So I want you to know that like base maximum of each individual support gem type is going to be 1. So if you have like a increased fire damage support, like you can only have it once in your entire build. This is going to increase that, but default is 1. Okay, Monk has Invoker, 3, 2, 1, and Acolyte of Chayula, 3, 2, 1. Okay, off we go. So meditate, it's important to note that this is a channel skill. It means that you only gain its effects while you are actively using it. So if you stop pressing the button, it's going to stop happening. Chilled and shocked ground. Ground effects basically effectively like they persistently apply their effects while the enemy is on it. So that means that, as long as that ground effect is there and an enemy is standing on top of it, they're going to be affected by its effects. So they'll be shocked, they'll be chilled, whatever. If the enemy takes one step off of that ground, it is no longer going to be affected by it. Okay, meta skills gain 35% more energy. We don't really know what these numbers mean because there's not a lot of information on meta skills or on energy for that matter at the moment. But it means that you'll be able to potentially use them more is what I'd best guess. I think that's just the like easiest way to think about it for now. Crits ignore non-negative enemy elemental resistances. Okay, this one sounds like a mouthful, but it's simpler than you expect, I promise. So resistances, we talked about them a little last time. They are just a percentage damage reduction from that type of damage. So fire resistance of 50% is going to mean when that fire attack hits you, you're gonna take half of it. Enemies can have elemental resistances. You probably figured that out from the text of the skill itself. And for reference, pinnacle bosses in Path of Exile 1 had 50% of each elemental resistance. I think they had 30% maybe of chaos resistance. Essentially this means that you can ignore any LE res when you crit, and that crit is going to do even more damage. I want to note here that Acolyte sounds super cool to me, but like when I'm seeing this skill right here, Mana Leech is instant. You cannot recharge energy shield. Mana Leech effects also recover energy shield. I mean, these sound sick. These sound really awesome. But I do think that it's important to recognize that this will be a difficult pivot. When you're speccing into this, you may have to upgrade your passive tree or your gear because you cannot recharge energy shield. That means energy shield regen rate, flat energy shield regen are going to be completely worthless on your build. So it might mean maybe a small decrease in your survivability until you can swap your gear to be have more maximum energy shield and maybe more mana leech on your gear or something. So I think that's worth noting if this is the direction you choose to go in. Reality rending. So this one is kind of complex, and I mean it sounds really simple, but I don't know how to calculate the damage that it's going to do because we don't know, for example, like the way that it rolls, if all three effects can take place at once. Like you get a mega jackpot and you gain 175% of your damage with hits as extra chaos damage. I mean, that would be massive, right? Assuming that these are not stackable, then this could be a pretty normal thing to take for just an increase in damage. But if you can roll a jackpot, I think this would be extremely huge in terms of dealing damage, and that means you would build chaos damage. Okay, I know I'm getting into the weeds here, so I'm just going to talk about potential defensive choices for beginners here. So Sorceress, it doesn't look like this has a lot of direct defensive options built into the Ascendancy itself. Chronomancer's slow might be helpful, but we don't know how that's going to play out in terms of ranged attacks hitting you, or what that radius feels like when you're fighting enemies. If it means you have to stand super close to a boss constantly to slow them, we don't know, right? So we'll have to see. Warrior. Any warrior ascendancy is probably fine if you like the warrior archetype. Know that the early game is probably going to be tough, but both ascendancies have really great defensive layer options, like block and raw armor and shield and things like that. So know that you should probably pick those if you want to be beefy and survive, which is important in PoE too. But that early game before you get these might be a little bit tough because you're up close and personal, right? Ranger, Deadeye with Tailwind might be helpful here. I think Tailwind is going to be really hard to quantify how helpful it is in terms of how often you get hit and lose those stacks. But we'll just have to see. But if you like Rangers, that's probably going to be a better pick for you in terms of survivability. Also know that in Path of Exile 1, Rangers were very, very squishy, very easy to die, and so you might just play and expect to die. Who knows? Witch. If you want to be going for survivability, I mean, maybe Blood Mage is the way to go. And I say maybe because while that one Ascendancy skill that I outlined will be extremely, extremely helpful, there are other things about the archetype itself that mean that you'll be taking damage as you cast skills and things. So it might be a little bit spicy for some beginners, just depending on your own comfort and ability. Mercenary, I would say maybe Gemling has more survivability options. I mean, with that being said, you know, Witchhunter, I mean, you know, if you kill them and they can't hit you, then you'll live, right? Who knows? So, you know, I think maybe Gemling is the way to go, but I think that might be a little complex. I do think Mercenary might be a tough one to choose and a very complex one. Monk is also probably really hard to survive with, just based off of the interview information we've had so far. They've said that this is the squishiest class, so just be warned going into it. But you know, Acolyte of Chayula, personally, I think the defensive options seem interesting. But like I said, there's that additional challenge upon specking where you have to like re-spec other things, and you have to like redo, you know, parts of your tree or things that could be a challenge, right? So in summary, don't ask me what to pick. I don't even know what I'm going to be picking, and do something that you think will be fun. Also, let me know in the comments what jumped out to you, or help me pick, because I'm struggling, and you know, I need your help. Please and thank you. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.